I pray that Ariana's story touches people from all walks of life. I hope that the loss of Ariana teaches the mother to encourage that child to be great and do great things, achieve the impossible. I hope it teaches the world to see policing and police officers in another light. Today is Ari's day. It's an honor to be her mother. And I pray that your story is always told, Ari, that it makes a difference in someone's life. I promise your name will be the change you wanted to see.
This street sign will be here to remind me not only of what I lost, but also what I've gained. I've gained some peace. Peace in knowing that Ariana not only lived her life to the fullest, but she lived it the way she saw fit. She always had so many dreams and goals, and the sign provides confirmation of that peace because of who she is. Goal-driven and an all-around trailblazer, always inventing new ways to be her unique self.
Still in her police uniform, just steps from her front door. After dedicating her life to protecting others, 24-year-old Areanah Preston thought she was safe in her own neighborhood. She was wrong. 4 teenagers were about to turn a routine trip home into Chicago's most heartbreaking headline of 2023. But this story doesn't start with the gunshots that would echo through the Avalon Park neighborhood in the early morning hours of May 6th. It starts with what happened after, with a phone call that would make even seasoned detectives question what they thought they knew about teenage criminals. Jalen Frazier was 16 years old when he picked up his phone and called a friend, not to confess, not to ask for help, not to express remorse. He called to brag. "That was my work," he told his friend, referring to the execution of a Chicago police officer just hours earlier. His work, like he was discussing a school project or a part-time job. The friend on the other end of the line was horrified. So horrified, in fact, that they did something remarkable in today's world of no snitching culture. They went straight to the police. What the friend didn't know was that when detectives asked them to call Frazier back, they would be listening to every word. And Frazier, still riding high on his deadly accomplishment, didn't disappoint. He continued bragging about the robberies and the shooting, revealing details that hadn't been released to the public, details that only someone who was there could know. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment confession extracted under pressure. This was a celebration. A 16-year-old boy was celebrating the fact that he had helped murder someone who had dedicated her life to protecting people just like him. Areanah Preston had no idea that May 5th would be her final shift with the Chicago Police Department's 5th District. She had no way of knowing that 4 teenagers, Joseph Brooks, 19, Travel Breland, 19, Jaquan Buchanan, 18, and Jalen Frazier, 16, had been prowling the streets of Chicago for hours, armed and dangerous, leaving a trail of terrified victims in their wake. The night had started with something so trivial it's almost insulting to Ariana's memory. Jaquan Buchanan's girlfriend needed money for a barbecue. That's it. That's what set this entire tragedy in motion. A barbecue. From that absurdly mundane beginning, these 4 would escalate through a series of armed robberies that grew increasingly violent with each victim. But Ariana knew none of this as she drove home after another shift protecting and serving her community. She didn't know about the 33-year-old woman who had been robbed at gunpoint for her Louis Vuitton belt, phone, and credit cards. She didn't know about the elderly women pushed to the ground, or the man who was surrounded and robbed after parking his Tesla. She couldn't have known that the red Kia sedan following her had been stolen just an hour earlier, or that 4 armed teenagers inside were about to make the most devastating decision of their young lives. What makes this case even more disturbing is that these weren't hardened career criminals. These were teenagers. Kids who should have been worried about prom, graduation, college applications, or summer jobs. Instead, they had chosen a path that would lead them to ambush a police officer in her own neighborhood, in her own uniform, just steps from her own front door. Areanah Preston was 24 years old. She was brilliant, ambitious, and just days away from achieving something extraordinary, graduating with a master's degree in jurisprudence from Loyola University Chicago School of Law. While working full-time as a police officer, she had been pursuing advanced legal education with dreams of joining the FBI. She represented everything these 4 teenagers could have become if they had made different choices. The contrast couldn't be more stark. On one side, you have a young woman who chose to serve others, who worked tirelessly to better herself and her community, who saw law enforcement as a stepping stone to even greater service to her country. On the other side, you have 4 teenagers who chose violence, who saw other people as nothing more than opportunities to take what they wanted. The most disturbing part? The aftermath. While Ariana's family began planning a funeral, while her mother Dion woke up hoping it was all a bad dream, while her colleagues in the Chicago Police Department mourned the loss of an exemplary officer, Jalen Frazier was on the phone bragging about his work. That phone call would ultimately lead to the downfall of all 4 suspects, but it also revealed something deeply troubling about the mindset of these young killers. They felt no remorse. They showed no humanity. They treated the murder of a dedicated public servant like an achievement to be celebrated. Before we go any further into this heartbreaking case, I want to know, where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city in the comments below. And if this case impacts you as much as it does me, hit that like button. We're going to need each other to get through this one. Because what happened next would expose not just the callousness of 4 teenagers, but failures in our justice system that allowed them to reach this point. To understand the true magnitude of what was lost on May 6, 2023, you need to understand who Areanah Preston really was. This wasn't just another crime statistic. This was the murder of someone who represented the very best of what a young person could aspire to become. Most 24-year-olds are figuring out their lives, maybe working their first real job, possibly still living with roommates, and wondering what they want to do with their future. Areanah Preston had already mapped out her destiny and was aggressively pursuing it with a determination that impressed everyone who knew her. By day, she patrolled the streets of Chicago's 5th District as a police officer, not because it was easy money or a family tradition, but because she genuinely believed in protecting and serving her community. She had already been on the force for over 2 years, and her colleagues consistently described her as exemplary. But here's what made Ariana extraordinary. While most officers were going home after their shifts to relax, she was heading to law school. Every night after protecting the streets of Chicago, Ariana would transform from Officer Preston into law student Preston. She was pursuing her master's degree in jurisprudence at Loyola University Chicago School of Law, one of the most demanding academic programs in the country. Think about the level of commitment that requires. After spending 8 or 10 hours dealing with criminals, domestic disputes, traffic stops, and all the stress that comes with police work, she would sit in law school classrooms, take notes, study case law, and write papers. Her mother, Ariana Moon, watched this incredible work ethic with a mixture of pride and concern. How many mothers worry about their daughters working too hard? Dion would see Ariana burning the candle at both ends, pursuing excellence in 2 of the most demanding fields in America simultaneously. But she also saw the purpose behind it all. Ariana had a dream that went far beyond her current roles. She wanted to join the FBI. This wasn't some childhood fantasy that she'd grow out of. This was a meticulously planned career trajectory. She understood that to be taken seriously as an FBI candidate, she needed real law enforcement experience. Hence, the police work. She also understood that to excel in federal law enforcement, she needed a deep understanding of the legal system. Hence the law degree. Her classmates at Loyola recognized her as a natural leader. While they were typical graduate students, she brought real-world experience to their discussions about criminal justice, constitutional law, and civil rights. When they debated theoretical cases in class, Ariana could contribute insights from actually working those cases on the street. Her professors valued her perspective because she wasn't just studying law, she was living it. What makes her story even more heartbreaking is the timing. May 6th wasn't just any random date. Ariana was literally days away from graduating with her master's degree. After years of juggling 2 incredibly demanding careers, She was about to achieve her academic goal. The graduation ceremony was scheduled for just a few days later. Her family had already made plans to celebrate. Her mother had probably already bought a new outfit for the occasion. Ariana Moon often reflects on how her daughter touched so many lives, both through her police work and her interactions with fellow students and professors. Areanah fought for justice in everything she did. She made communities better simply by being present and engaged. She was the kind of person who could bridge the gap between law enforcement and the communities they serve, because she understood both sides so deeply. The tragedy isn't just that a good person died. The tragedy is that America lost someone who could have made a real difference at the highest levels of law enforcement. Someone who understood the streets, understood the law, and had the intelligence and determination to reform systems from within. Someone who could have brought real-world police experience to federal investigations and policymaking. Her colleagues remember her as someone who didn't just show up for work. She showed up to make things better. Her fellow law students remember her as someone who elevated their discussions and brought gravity to their studies. Her professors remember her as someone who embodied the practical application of everything they were teaching. In just a few days, Areanah would have walked across that graduation stage, received her master's degree, and taken the next step toward her FBI dreams. Instead, her family would be planning a funeral. Instead of celebrating her academic achievement, they would be mourning the loss of someone who represented unlimited potential. The cruelest irony? While Areanah was building a future dedicated to justice and service, 4 teenagers were making choices that would destroy multiple futures in a single night. What if I told you that one of Chicago's most heinous crimes started because someone wanted money for a barbecue? Not rent money, not drug money, not even money for something expensive or impressive. Barbecue money. Jaquan Buchanan's girlfriend wanted to throw a barbecue, and apparently asking family for help or getting a part-time job wasn't an option. Instead, Buchanan decided that armed robbery was the logical solution to this pressing culinary emergency. This absurd motivation set in motion a night of terror that would escalate from petty theft to murder in just under 2 hours. But here's what makes this case even more disturbing. The progression wasn't random. Each crime was more violent than the last, each victim more vulnerable, each choice more reckless. These 4 teenagers were learning how to be killers in real time. Shortly after midnight on May 6th, Joseph Brooks, Travel Breland, Jaquan Buchanan, and Jalen Frazier met up with 2 women and climbed into a Dodge Avenger. All 4 were dressed in black clothing and wearing face coverings. They weren't trying to look cool or make a fashion statement. They were preparing for war against innocent people. Their first target was a 33-year-old woman walking alone in the 900 block of East 46th Street. 4 armed teenagers surrounded one woman. The odds were already pathetic, but they didn't care about fair fights. They wanted her Louis Vuitton belt, her phone, and her credit cards. She handed everything over, probably terrified and praying they would just leave her alone. They did, but only because they had bigger plans. After successfully terrorizing their first victim, they decided to upgrade their transportation. Why steal phones and credit cards when you could steal an entire car? They spotted a red Kia sedan in the 4700 block of South Indiana Avenue and took it. This wasn't just theft, this was acquiring a mobile weapon platform. They left the 2 women behind because what they were planning next wasn't for witnesses. Now armed and mobile, they were ready to hunt more aggressively. Their second robbery targeted 2 women, a 62-year-old and a 29-year-old, in the 1000 block of South Wallace Avenue. Notice the pattern? They consistently chose victims who were either outnumbered, older, or both. These weren't confrontations with people who could fight back effectively. These were predators selecting the most vulnerable prey they could find. But pushing elderly women to the ground and stealing their belongings apparently wasn't satisfying enough. They needed more violence, more terror, more control. Their third robbery escalated again. They found a man who had just parked his Tesla in the 9100 block of South Merrill and surrounded him. 4 teenagers with guns against one person trying to go about his normal evening. They took his phone and his car key, But more importantly, they were getting bolder, more confident, more dangerous. Here's where the story takes its most tragic turn. After 3 successful robberies, after terrorizing multiple innocent people, after proving to themselves that they could take whatever they wanted from whoever they wanted, they made a decision that would change everything. They began following a car. Not just any car. They had spotted someone they thought would be an easy target. Someone driving alone. Someone they could overwhelm with numbers and firepower. Someone who, in their twisted logic, represented another opportunity to take what wasn't theirs. They had no idea that the person in that car was Officer Areanah Preston. They didn't know she was trained in defensive tactics. They didn't know she was armed. They didn't know she would fight back. They probably thought she would be just like their previous victims, scared, compliant, and easy to rob. But this decision revealed something terrifying about their mindset. They weren't satisfied with 3 successful robberies. They weren't ready to call it a night and go home with their stolen goods. They wanted more. They had developed a taste for violence and domination that 3 robberies couldn't satisfy. The stolen Kia became their predator vehicle, allowing them to hunt with mobility and speed. They could strike, escape, and strike again before police could respond. They could follow potential victims and choose the perfect moment to attack. They had transformed from opportunistic criminals into active hunters. As they followed Ariana's car through the streets of Chicago, they had no way of knowing that their crime spree was about to end in the worst possible way. They thought they were following another easy victim. They thought they were about to score another quick robbery. They thought they were in control. I have to pause here because this next part is difficult to process. 4 teenagers let greed and violence consume them so completely that they forgot they were dealing with human lives. If you're feeling as frustrated as I am about where this is heading, let me know in the comments. But also subscribe because cases like this remind us why we need to keep talking about these issues. They were about to learn the difference between terrorizing innocent civilians and confronting someone trained to fight back. 1:45 a.m., May 6, 2023. Areanah Preston pulled into her neighborhood in Avalon Park, exhausted from another shift protecting Chicago's streets. She was still wearing her police uniform, probably looking forward to getting inside, changing clothes, and maybe getting a few hours of sleep before her next commitment. She had no idea that the red Kia sedan that had been following her was about to turn her homecoming into an execution. The stolen Kia pulled up as Ariana stepped out of her vehicle. She was just steps from her front door, in her own neighborhood, wearing the uniform that represented her commitment to protecting others. In that moment, she probably felt as safe as anyone could feel coming home from work. 4 doors opened simultaneously. Joseph Brooks, Travel Breland, Jaquan Buchanan, and Jalen Frazier emerged from the vehicle, all armed, all focused on their target. They had been emboldened by 3 successful robberies that night. They thought this would be just another easy victim, another quick score before calling it a night. They were catastrophically wrong. What happened next would separate this case from a typical robbery gone wrong. These 4 teenagers weren't dealing with a scared civilian. They weren't confronting someone who would simply hand over their belongings and hope for the best. They were about to face someone trained in defensive tactics, someone who had sworn an oath to protect and serve, someone who wouldn't go down without a fight. As the 4 armed teenagers ran toward her, Areanah Preston made a split-second decision that would define the final moments of her life. She reached for her service weapon. She wasn't going to be another victim. She wasn't going to let these criminals add her to their list of people they had terrorized that night. Joseph Brooks later admitted to police that he fired first because Areanah reached for her gun. Think about that for a moment. A police officer, trained in firearms, wearing her uniform, standing in front of her own home, reached for her weapon when confronted by 4 armed criminals, and Brooks' response was to shoot her. Not to run, not to reconsider this insane plan. His instinct was to kill. But Areanah Preston wasn't going down without a fight. Even as Brooks opened fire, she managed to draw her weapon and return fire. For a brief moment, this wasn't an execution. It was a gunfight between a trained police officer and 4 amateur criminals. For a brief moment, justice had a chance. That chance didn't last long. 4 guns against 1, even when that one belonged to a trained officer, created impossible odds. The teenagers continued shooting, and 2 bullets found their target. One struck Areanah in the face. Another hit her neck. Both wounds were fatal. As Officer Preston fell in front of her own home, still wearing the uniform she had worn proudly for over 2 years, one of the attackers made a decision that elevated this from murder to something even more heinous. They stole her service weapon. They took the gun that represented her authority, her training, her commitment to justice, and they stole it like a trophy. The 4 killers climbed back into the stolen Kia and fled the scene, leaving Areanah dying in front of her own home. They probably thought they had committed the perfect crime. They had eliminated the only witness who could fight back, stolen valuable items, and escaped in a vehicle that couldn't be traced to them. But this is 2023, and technology doesn't sleep. 2 systems activated almost immediately after the shooting. The city's ShotSpotter detection system registered the gunfire and automatically alerted police dispatch. But even more remarkably, Ariana's Apple Watch detected what it interpreted as a traffic crash and sent an emergency alert to police dispatch. Even in her final moments, even as she lay dying, technology was working to bring her killers to justice. A 4th District officer received these alerts and responded immediately. They found Areanah critically wounded in front of her home and provided immediate medical aid before transporting her to the hospital. Despite their best efforts, she was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. Meanwhile, the 4 killers were already working to cover their tracks. Approximately 20 minutes after the shooting, the stolen red Kia was found in the 7200 block of South Rhodes Avenue. It had been set on fire. They were trying to destroy evidence, eliminate fingerprints, DNA, and any other traces that could connect them to the murder. But they had made one critical mistake. Actually, several critical mistakes, but the biggest one was underestimating modern police work. Within a week of Ariana's murder, all 4 suspects were in custody. Technology, witness cooperation, and good detective work had closed the net around them faster than they could have imagined. The teenagers who thought they were smart enough to commit the perfect crime were about to learn that murdering a police officer brings resources and attention they weren't prepared for. If Jalen Frazier had just kept his mouth shut, this case might have taken months or even years to solve. Instead, his need to brag about committing murder became the thread that unraveled everything for all 4 suspects. Hours after executing Areanah Preston, while her family was beginning to process the unthinkable loss of their daughter, 16-year-old Jalen Frazier was on the phone with a friend. But he wasn't calling to confess. He wasn't calling because he felt guilty. He wasn't calling to ask for help or advice. He was calling to boast. "That was my work," Frazier told his friend, referring to the murder of a Chicago police officer. Not, "We messed up." Not, "Something terrible happened." Not, "I think we're in trouble." He called it his work. Like he was a professional. Like he was proud of what he had accomplished. The friend on the other end of that phone call faced a choice that would define their character. In many communities, there's an unwritten rule about not cooperating with police. There's pressure to mind your own business, to not get involved, to protect friends even when they've done horrible things. But this friend understood that some lines can't be uncrossed. Some crimes can't be ignored. Some friendships aren't worth preserving. They went directly to the police. When detectives heard what Frazier had allegedly said, they asked the friend to make another call. But this time, investigators would be listening to every word. The friend agreed, probably nervous but determined to do the right thing. They called Frazier back, and what happened next sealed the fate of all 4 suspects. Frazier, still riding high on his deadly accomplishment, didn't disappoint. He continued bragging about the robberies and the shooting, providing details that hadn't been released to the public. Details about the sequence of crimes, details about the stolen vehicle, details about the confrontation with Areanah, details that only someone who was there could possibly know. Every word was being recorded. Every boast was becoming evidence. Every detail was building a case that would be impossible to defend against. But Frazier wasn't the only one whose mouth became his downfall. Joseph Brooks, the 19-year-old who later admitted to firing first, also made statements to police. He told investigators that he shot Areanah Preston because she reached for her gun. He didn't claim self-defense. He didn't claim it was an accident. He admitted to executing a police officer because she tried to defend herself. These confessions were backed up by what prosecutors called a mountain of evidence. Pod camera video had captured portions of their crime spree. Cell phone data placed at least one suspect in the areas where the robberies occurred. Ballistics evidence linked the recovered weapons to the shooting. DNA evidence connected the suspects to the stolen vehicle. The two women who had accompanied them during the early part of their crime spree identified the suspects in photo arrays. But perhaps the most damaging evidence of all was their own criminal histories. These weren't good kids who made one terrible mistake. All four suspects had extensive juvenile records that painted a clear picture of escalating violence and repeated failures of the justice system to intervene effectively. Jaquan Buchanan had been arrested for armed robbery, sent to juvenile detention for carjacking while on probation, and classified as a violent juvenile offender. His case had been closed just weeks before Preston's murder. Travel Breland had been on probation at the time of the murder, with a record dating back to 2018 that included attacking a teacher and pushing his mother downstairs. Jalen Frazier's first arrest was at age 13, and despite 4 years of probation, he continued to be arrested for weapons offenses, armed robbery, and car theft. These weren't isolated incidents. These were patterns of behavior that the system had failed to address effectively. 3 of the 4 suspects had involvement with the Department of Children and Family Services, suggesting troubled backgrounds that never received adequate intervention. When all 4 suspects appeared before Judge David Kelly for their initial hearing, prosecutors presented their overwhelming evidence. The judge ordered all 4 held without bail, citing the strength of the case and the violent nature of their crime spree. Despite this evidence, all 4 entered not guilty pleas, setting up a legal battle that won't conclude until June 2025. The prosecution even took the unusual step of requesting a judge substitution, seeking to replace Judge Carol M. Howard with someone they believed would be more appropriate for such a serious case. They succeeded, and Judge Adrian Davis was assigned to oversee what promises to be a lengthy and complex trial. 4 teenagers who thought they were smart enough to commit the perfect crime had instead created a perfect case against themselves. In the aftermath of losing her daughter, Ariana Moon faced a choice that no mother should ever have to make. She could retreat into her grief, consumed by the senseless violence that had stolen her child's future, or she could find a way to honor Ariana's memory by continuing the work her daughter had started, making communities safer and giving young people better opportunities. Dion chose hope over hatred. She chose action over anger. She chose to build something lasting from the ruins of her shattered world. The Peace for Preston Foundation became Dion's way of keeping her daughter's spirit alive. But this wasn't just a memorial organization created to ease a mother's pain. This was a strategic response to the very problems that had contributed to Ariana's death. If 4 teenagers with extensive juvenile records could escalate from petty crimes to murder, then the system needed intervention programs that actually worked. The Foundation's most significant achievement is the $100,000 endowment that established the Areanah Preston Memorial Scholarship at Loyola University Chicago School of Law. This scholarship specifically targets law enforcement officers and civilians pursuing careers in public service, with a focus on social justice and community impact. Every recipient represents Ariana's dreams continuing through someone else's dedication. But Dion understood that scholarships alone wouldn't prevent another tragedy like her daughter's. The real work had to happen at the community level, with young people who were at risk of making the same choices that destroyed 4 teenagers' lives on May 6, 2023. The Foundation's youth mentoring programs operate throughout Chicago, providing safe spaces and guidance for children who might otherwise find themselves attracted to street life. These aren't feel-good programs that offer temporary distractions. These are evidence-based interventions designed to address the root causes that lead teenagers to commit armed robberies for barbecue money. The community's response to Ariana's death has been remarkable. A street in the Avalon Park neighborhood was renamed in her honor, ensuring that her name will be part of that community forever. A memorial garden was planted outside the police station where she worked, with benches donated by community members. One bench bears the inscription, "God's Forever Sunflower," a testament to how Ariana brightened the lives of everyone she encountered. Perhaps most significantly, her colleagues in the Chicago Police Department have maintained their support for her family throughout the long legal process. Officers regularly accompany Dion to court hearings, showing solidarity and ensuring she doesn't face this ordeal alone. Loyola University Chicago School of Law posthumously conferred Ariana's master's degree in jurisprudence, recognizing that she had completed all requirements despite her life being cut short just days before graduation. Her name is now forever etched in her alma mater's records, and her story continues to inspire current law students who understand the sacrifice she made in pursuit of justice. The foundation also sponsors community events like mother-daughter proms, creating positive experiences for families while building networks of support that can prevent young people from falling into criminal lifestyles. Every program, every scholarship, every community event represents a choice to respond to violence with hope rather than despair. Dion often speaks about finding comfort in the countless stories of how Ariana impacted others, stories she never knew during her daughter's lifetime. These testimonials remind her that her daughter's influence extended far beyond what any of them realized, and that influence continues through the Foundation's work. Areanah Preston's story doesn't end with her death. It continues through every life touched by her foundation, every scholarship recipient, and every young person who chooses a different path because someone cared. If her story moved you, share this video to help spread her legacy of service. And tell me in the comments, what would you want your legacy to be? The 4 teenagers who murdered Ariana may have ended her life, but they couldn't destroy her impact. Through her mother's incredible strength and the community's support, that impact grows stronger every day.